Hello, it's Bill here. I want to talk to you just briefly about some really basic things that may help you regarding vocabulary. And I've picked chapter 7 to actually do that. In other words, I'm looking at the vocabulary on page 50 of the book. And first of all, I hope you're doing what I suggested when I first contacted you, that when you take vocabulary or even main points of grammar, I'm presuming that with the video lecture and then with the grammatical book that you've got, that what you'll do is you'll highlight elements in the book and then you'll be going over them, preferably highlighting them and then making notes on them. And then you're revising them. Every time you learn some new material, you've got to go back to re-establish the old material that you've got. It's a bit like the magicians who are, remember, have you seen them where they're balancing plates and they get a plate spinning and then they go on to another one? By the time they've done 3 other plates, the first plate's starting to falter. So you go back and you work on the first plate again and you keep on adding to it. It's a bit like that in terms of vocabulary and grammar. In other words, you're learning things off by heart. I mean, when all is said and done, Mounds has now said to you this. He said, you must learn this paradigm. You must learn the definite article, masculine, feminine, and neuter. Yes, okay. Now, having said that then, well, what do you do with the vocabulary? Well, I presume you've done what I've asked you to do, which is write it out 3 times and then say it in Greek and say it in English each time you do it. Don't worry about making a fool of yourself, or test yourself with the flashcards, or do as I did. What did I do? Oh, this is the days of cassette tapes. I used to put them on a cassette tape and then I'd play it in my car when I was going traveling anywhere. And you can do that. You can do all that now, of course. All that. It's all the, whatever you do in the hours that you're not doing anything particularly other than driving or whatever the situation is, then it will help facilitate you remembering this stuff. And what happens is you might use, I'll call them cheap ways. They're not necessarily cheap at all, but they may look like that. And you think that won't work. But I'll tell you, just from my experience, it does work. And that is to use visualization techniques. If you're not very good at finding that you write it out 3 times and you're trying to remember it and you don't remember it a few days later and so on, how do you do it? Well, the principle of visualization techniques is to either do this, is to either associate something that you know with something you don't know, or else to use a visual imagery that is so stark. Now, for example, if somebody came in here now and hit me over the head with I don't know, with a coat or with a rake or whatever, you would remember that for a while. It's very unusual, right? So what you have to do is construct pictures in your mind that help you. And what happens, and I'll mention this at the end, is that what happens is that you, after a while, you disassociate the picture you've put in your mind with the actual object within itself. And so therefore you make that transition, because it sounds rather cumbersome at first. So you've got to go through a difficult process of learning the word in English, the word in Greek. But to get to the word in Greek, you've got to construct this visual imagery. So you go from the word in English to the visual imagery to the Greek, or the other way around. Well, after a while, after a very short while, what happens is that the visual imagery disappears. One of the most obvious examples for me is prosopon, face. Okay, I learned that generation ago by putting soap on my face. So whenever I thought of that word and I saw it in Greek, I knew it meant face because I could see the imagery of it, of me putting soap on my face. Now, having said that, the imagery is faded, and I now make the connection very, very easy. So what I want to do is just go through the vocabulary in chapter 7 and just show you some of the ways that I would approach this. For example, hamartia, sin, there at the beginning of that vocabulary. You can think of that in terms of, when I was looking at that, I was looking at the sound of the syllables. Hamartia, I was thinking of heart, hamartia, heart. So in other words, you could picture somebody stabbing you in the heart. That's sin. It could be a word that comes out of someone's mouth. Picture their tongue coming out and stabbing you in the heart. Heart, sin. They're doing something wrong to you. Hamartia. So then when you see that word, then you associate with that visual imagery of being stabbed in the heart, hamartia, and so on. So now you know exactly what that word means. Arche, that's fairly easy because just associate it with archaeology, the study of origins or beginnings and so on. Don't worry about gar, that's a sort of a connective word, and don't worry about apen because that is so common. It's a form of the verb to say, lego. So in other words, you don't have to worry about those two because they're going to come up so many times that you'll know them. Ace, into. I'll give you later on a diagram of all the prepositions in terms of their origin and where they're moving towards. Ace, into, ek, out of, and so forth. One way of doing it is to think of, I didn't do this, but just came to my mind right now, ice. Ace, ice, ace, ice. So ice is, I'm breaking the ice by jumping into it. I'm jumping into the water through the ice. Ace, into, you see. It's a preposition. All right. That's how I'm doing it. Exousia, Dr. Seuss. Picture Dr. Seuss in that terribly great, that hat. Yeah, I'm English, so I learned this through my own children by getting Dr. Seuss books. The big hat he's got, and he's there on the throne, and he's telling everybody else, whoever they are, and I was thinking of the Munchkins, but that's the Wizard of Oz, isn't it? He's telling everybody who's around him, he's on this massive throne, and he's saying, do this, do this, do this. I have all authority, I have all power, exousia, and so forth. Dr. Seuss. Evangelion, very obvious, obviously. That's the gospel. Jesus, again. Kurios, easy. Jesus Kurios, Jesus is Lord. Me, don't worry about that. That's just it's a very emphatic negation. The positive element of that is but we don't be concerned, because you're going to come across that many times that you'll pick it up. Uranos, I was thinking of that. Imagine that there's a terrible storm coming from the sky, the heavens, and you're looking up and you say, "Ooh, run!" and you run. So you picture yourself, and maybe the sky is starting to fall in on you, and the rain's coming, and you're going, "Ooh, run!" I know this is crazy, and you're not going to say it because I've given you words. But what I've got when I do it, I picture myself in this situation. So when I come across that word, I'm immediately going to know that it's basically what? It's heaven, and so forth, sky. Same with, hutos, aute, tuto, demonstrative adjective. How would you do that? Well, I was thinking of auto, automobile, so that you could say that the utos, you're looking at these automobiles. You've got three of them. Utos is masculine, so that's a masculine car. What color? Let's say it's black. I think it was a Volkswagen for some reason. The feminine car, the aute, that's that's pink. And then the tutor, which is neuter, let's put it grey. So you've got three cars that you're looking at here, three Volkswagens, and it's this one in the singular and these in the plural. So you could be saying to yourself or somebody, picture yourself doing this, do I take this one or this one or this one, or do I take all of these? You see, you've now got it in that form. Moving on over the page there. Su, again, you'll come across that so many times as a second person pronoun that I wouldn't worry about it. Although you could. My wife's name is Susan, so I could say, Sue, you. You see? That's how you do it. Huios, that's an easy one. Because I always remember that statement that Augustus is reputed to have said about Herod, who massacred the children. It's in Matthew's Gospel at the beginning. Herod not only massacred the children in Bethlehem and so forth who were under 2 years old, but he got rid of a lot of his family. He even executed some of his wives. So he was bad. And so I think that Augustus made a comment that it's better to be Herod's pig than his son. Now in Greek, huios is son, but if you take one letter out, the iota, hus, is pig. So it's a play on the Greek word or the elements then of upsilon and sigma. So that's one way of remembering huios. And surely after what I've just said, you've picked that one up. Hoste, I was trying to think of a way that you would remember that. Again, you're going to come across it so many times that I wouldn't worry too much about it. I was thinking of toast. Hoste, toast. And then I was thinking of, what does it mean? It means therefore. And immediately when I thought of therefore, I thought of the mathematical symbol of the three dots. So I pictured three big pieces of bread, toast, before me. Therefore, hoste. That's how I do it. You say, but hang on, I'm going to get my head full of toast and Dr. Seuss and all this stuff. You do initially, but it fades after a very short time and you remember the word. The key to it, though, is to make it as vivid as possible and at the same time to go over it. So you only need to go over it for 3 or 4 days and you'll get it within your mind, and then once a week maybe, or whenever it is that you do your revision, and he gives you good time to do a revision, just mounts, then you go through it, and what will happen is that the visual elements will disappear, and you'll know what the word is. Previous words that he's got down here, there's a lot of them that I don't have to worry about because they're self-evident, agape and so forth, angelos, anthropos, very easy, apostolos, easy. Basileia, if you know the herb basil, I would picture a king, any king that you want. I wouldn't picture Dr. Seuss's king, because you don't want to get your imagery mixed up. But picture a king, I don't know, King Charles of England or whatever, if he ever gets to be king, he probably won't. And you picture him with a crown, they put a crown on his head, and it's just covered in basil, the herb, and so on. So that's how I would do it. Basileia is kingdom, and so on. Right the way down, graphe, that's fairly obvious. Doxa is glory. Zoe, zoology, life, and so forth. Kairos, that's interesting. There's a difference between kairos and chronos. Chronos is particular time, moment by moment, where kairos is fitting opportunity. It's the time. When Jesus announces the kingdom of God in Mark's Gospel in chapter 1, verses 13 and 14, and in Matthew chapter 4, verse 17, I think, he says that it's the right kairos, not chronos, not moment by moment. It's the right, this is the time, this is the opportunity. I would remember that by, I knew a woman called Kyra. So I would picture Kyra coming to my door, and I opened the door, and I said, "Oh, you've just arrived at the right time, Kyra." Okay? Interestingly enough, chronos is very important. Chronos is the other side of that. In other words, incremental time, chronology. When I was teaching in the University of Swaziland, in Southern Africa, in Swaziland, the university was just like a British university or a US university. Exactly the same, all the buildings, the classrooms and so on, but there was no clock tower. That interests me. There's no clock tower. You notice that up at University of Simpson University, there's a clock tower there. It doesn't look very good. It's certainly not a cultural artifact, but there's a clock tower there. Why? Because the clock tower signifies the way that we think. I learned that in Swaziland, the way that we think. Because I was teaching 60 students, whatever it was, and then finally, one day one of them says, "We don't understand a word you're saying." Okay, so I started to get down to where is it? What are we at here? And I realized that they didn't think like I did. And then I realized that we've had 2,000 years that go back to a Greek tradition that helps us understand how to think. Chronos, incremental time as it moves forward. The watch, I haven't got a watch. We don't need a watch now with a cell phone and so on. On it goes. So from that standpoint, that's integral to who we are. Kairos, though, is fitting opportunity, isn't it? A fitting opportunity, kairos. Went a long way there to get that. You must know that by now. Cardia is fairly obvious. Cardiology is heart and so on. Phone, phonograph, voice and so forth. Aura, think of an aura. Think of an aura around a clock. It means hour then. What? Or think of it then that the clock has got this aura around it. All right. Now, having said that, then I would apply that also to the exegesis in the grammatical points that are made with the genitive case and the dative case, because they can be difficult to understand. And in actual fact, the great thing about this in Greek is that it sounds so hard because you're learning all this stuff. Yes, but at the end of the day, when you're dealing with a translation, like if we get an opportunity, we'll get into 1 John. The material is all there before you. We don't have to worry about translating from English to Greek, except just as an exercise. Ultimately, we're only interested in one thing, and that is the Greek before us, and then translating it to English, right? So therefore, what we do here is we will come across these different examples of the genitive case, and then we can work them out according to the translation. Like Mount says, at first, you just use the word of. Just stick with of for a while, and then you'll start to see there's other elements of it too. And he lists 9 of them here. Now, how would I learn that? Well, one of the ways, remember I said that you learn something you don't know by something you do know, by association, and then you accommodate it. So in other words, to understand something that's completely new, it's got to somehow relate to what you already know. Otherwise, you won't be able to even understand it. Try to explain what hip hop is to somebody from Mars, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work at all. Unless the Martians somehow had understood what dancing was and so forth, and etc., etc. So in other words, then you associate it with something that you already know. So to do that, what I would do, and I've done this for many years, is I'm in this room. This is my basically my dining room. This is my kitchen table, and it leads into our dining room. So what I would do is I would hang all 9 points in this room. 9 points of the grammar of genitive. So in other words, the first element, which is what? It's a description of what Marans calls the head noun. So it's of. So what I did was, if you can see maybe right behind me, I hope you can see it, maybe not, I've got windows that lead out into our backyard where there's a swimming pool. So on the window, there's 2 windows there, I put in my mind of, descriptive of the what? Of the head noun. Now, in what sense head? Fulsome. So I pictured that whole window then with of on it, and I know that that's then descriptive of the head noun. I could, if I wanted to get gruesome, I could say take a few people who I didn't like, and cut their heads off and stick them on the top of the window frame where the window is that leads outside, because that would be, oh yes, I know, relates to the head noun. You see, that's number 1. Number 2 is what? The possessive sense of your. Well, what I did when I was doing that is I have a son who's 28. We had a dog called Charlie, and I'd see him coming by with the dog outside, and I'd look at him and I'd say, is that your dog? I'm pointing at him. Is that your dog? And I'm seeing him looking up and saying, hugging it, saying, it is, it's my dog. Is that your dog? Possessive. Number 2. Number 3 that's given here is what? It's apposition. I mentioned apposition, I think, last time in terms of a sentence. I am Bill. Bill and I are in apposition because it's the same subject. The subject and the complement are to go together. So in this case, you've got the genitive case that relates to the same thing. The Holy Spirit, which is put in the genitive, the adjective holy, and at the same time spirit. So what do you do then? Well, what I did was I pictured one equals the other. Because they're equal, they're in apposition. So I thought of the equal sign, and I stuck the equal sign over my pool. You can't see it here. And I had Isaiah 6 with that great train of God in the temple and so on. In other words, the tremendous sense of the holiness of God. Holy, holy, holy. You know, who shall go? I'm thinking of Isaiah 6, 1 through 6. And then I had an equal sign above the pool, and on the other side of the pool, I had the notion of spirit. In other words, I was picturing actually some sort of, I guess a science fiction thing, a big white ball sort of thing. All it's meant to do, don't get me for blasphemy here in terms of the Holy Spirit. This is just simply a way of remembering what this means. It means in apposition. You're going to come across it in the genitive case. So therefore, what have we done now? I've done 3. The 4th one, I think you can see I've got 2 music pictures behind me of musicians. And what I would do is I would separate them from them as they are separated, and I'd put the word from in my mind, and I'd look at it and make sure that the word from is between the pictures. Visually, I'm seeing that. The pictures behind me. So that I notice then that the sense of genitive is what? It's something that helps, it assists words to see that there's a separation, as the example here, from the Commonwealth of Israel. In other words, this is something much more than of, because that starts us off with the genitive with of. We've started that, we know that. But now we're learning other ways of doing it. So what have we done? We've done 4. And then the next 3 are easy, because it's subject, object, and then all of it. In other words then, the subjective genitive, the love of Christ, subject means that then the genitive then is the subject. In other words, the love of Christ is Christ's love. That's subjective genitive. As opposed to the objective genitive, which is number 6, then it's the love of Christ. In other words, it's love that's given as an object. Now, I could picture on my behind me on my fireplace Jesus standing there. I've got to be careful here. I admit I'm a Protestant. Is in one hand he could have a Subway sandwich, subjective, and in the other hand he could be having an object. You see, so subject, object. Which is it? You come across this loads and loads of times. It actually took me a couple of years initially to understand what was the difference was between subjective and objective genitive. You come across it. It's important in translation. There's a difference between saying the love of Christ is Christ's love, as opposed to the love of Christ is an object that's for us. All right, and then the third one on that, which is actually number 7, is plenary. Plenary, well, the word plenary, I've never really heard the word plenary except for when I've been reading through years ago of the authority of the Bible. Plenary inspiration. Plenary means absolute, it means all of it. In other words, it could be in a text, well, as he gives here, 2 Corinthians 5:14, for the love of Christ compels us. It's probably both subjective and objective genitive, or we can't work it out, you see. So in other words, plenary then, so you've got those 3 that work together. All right, and then you've got 2 more. Genitive then can indicate familiar relationship. I'd picture my daughter come in, her name is Lorna, and I'm giving her a hug. So it's Lorna, daughter of Bill, you see. Of's used there, but the idea is the relationship, a familiar relationship. And then the final one is the genitive is part of a larger unit. Some of the branches. Again, of is being used, but you know that it's what? It's partitive. It's part of something else, of something that's smaller, and the genitive that's something larger. I would picture a tree coming through the front door, because look at the example he gives. Some of the branches. And a huge branch comes through the front door. So now what have I done? I've actually given you 9 of these genitive uses, expanding from of. And I've put them in a context of what I know. And that is my room here. So I could go right from the beginning and I could say, of that's written on the door, or I could take you from there, possession in the sense of your, my son, with the dog, or opposition, Holy Spirit out there with equal sign apposition in respect to above my pool and so forth. Moving to separation with the 2 pictures on the wall. See, I'm seeing this and I'm thinking of these definitions in logical order, and they're in my mind because they're in a filing system of my house. And I go right through to the 3 cases. That's pretty easy, with Jesus standing there in the fireplace with subjective, objective, or plenary. And then what? Then I have my daughter. In other words, it's a familiar relationship with the genitive. And then the final one is it's partitive in the sense of a part of the whole, the genitive. So in other words, I've just done that now, and I would know all those 9 uses of the genitive, and I just go over it for a few days. And what will happen after a while, when I start coming across them, I'll be able to say, oh, it's not just of here. That's a partitive genitive. Whoa, yes. Oh, that's in opposition, you see? So in other words, this really does help you to learn that. Now, I'm not going to do it with the dative case. I'm going to hold it and stop it here. But I want to really encourage you to make sure that you're grounded in the way that when you see at the end of the chapter, when he talks about the number of words, the percentage of words in the New Testament that you know. Now, that should make you feel good, because you're getting more and more into the New Testament in the sense of you learn it as you go along. So by the end of this semester, you'll have it there. You'll forget it a bit, at Christmas time when you go off and do things at Christmas. But what you've learned, most of it's going to come back. And then, like I said to you last time, is that let's say you only absorb 65% of 100% of the grammar. Well, what's going to happen is when you get into translation, then you'll pick up another 20%. And the harder stuff in the grammar, you'll start to recognize this is difficult. Then you refer back to the grammar book. It's a process you keep on going. But I tell you, it works. Now, as I've said, contact me if you need to. My cell phone is area code 530-518-2185. Any problems that you have as we get further and further into this Greek. All right. Wishing you well this week. Take care. Bye-bye.